Salamanders, Road from Isstvan. In collaboration with Horus Heresy Legions, to commemorate their new expansion, Galaxy in Flames. It is a time of legend. The galaxy is in flames. The Emperor's glorious vision for humanity is in ruins. His favoured son, Horus, has turned from his father's light and embraced chaos. His armies, the mighty and redoubtable Space Marines, are locked in a brutal civil war. Once these ultimate warriors fought side by side as brothers, protecting the galaxy and bringing mankind back into the Emperor's light. Now they are divided. Some remain loyal to the Emperor, while others have sided with the War Master. Preeminent amongst them, the leaders of their 1,000-strong legions, are the Primarchs, magnificent superhuman beings. They are the crowning achievement of the Emperor's genetic science. Thrust into battle against one another, victory is uncertain for either side. Worlds are burning. At Istvaan 5, Horus dealt a vicious blow, and 3 loyal legions were all but destroyed. War was begun. A conflict that will engulf all of mankind in fire. Treachery and betrayal have usurped honor and nobility. Assassins lurk in every shadow. Armies are gathering. All must choose a side or die. Horus musters his armada, Terra itself the object of his wrath. Seated upon the golden throne, the Emperor waits for his wayward son to return. But his true enemy is chaos, a primordial force that seeks to enslave mankind to its capricious whims. The screams of the innocent, the pleas of the righteous resound to the cruel laughter of dark gods. Suffering and damnation await all should the Emperor fail and the war be lost. The age of knowledge and enlightenment has ended. The age of darkness has begun. Welcome, gentle listener. I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the treachery, horror, and despair of the Warhammer 30k universe, when the age of knowledge and enlightenment has ended, and the age of darkness has begun. The terrible era of the Horus Heresy. This video is sponsored and inspired by Horus Heresy Legions. Please see the links in the description and give it a go. I sincerely hope that by the end of this little introduction, your mouth will water at the chance to play through some of the events that are about to be outlined. Just basics, as I always do, but a start. A springboard for you to use to take your own first dip into the Horus Heresy period, the Age of Darkness. And there really is no better way than to simply listen to this video and then have a go at it. Horus Heresy Legions is playable on any smartphone or handheld device, but thankfully, it is also on Steam, so it can be played on a PC, as I prefer myself. Now, I will note that I usually do take a break in the month of January, but when they said the topic to be covered, well, I could not in all good conscience refuse, for it contains one of the most important moments, the most crux confrontations in all of the Horus Heresy. But all in good time. And so, gentle listener, let us now get to the matter. For today, we shall be discussing one of the most interesting and courageous, humble and human of all of the sons of the Emperor, his genetically engineered demigods, his Primarchs. Today, we shall be discussing that titan of incorruptibility and nobility. Today, we shall be discussing Vulkan, the Primarch of the 18th Legion, the Salamanders. Along the way we shall see how the Salamanders survived the hammer blow of the betrayal at Isstvan, the Dropsite Massacre, and then never gave up on hope. And we shall meet some of their leading lights, two of the pitiful few that survived the horror of that one event that shattered the Legion. So, sit back and let us discuss more of the Age of Darkness together, and in some small way we shall see that there are still some vestiges of light that blaze even in these the most hopeless of all times. Let us join the Salamanders on the road from Istvaan and the journeys of Vulkan to the very throne on Terra. Now, to begin, let us see what happened to Primarch Vulkan directly after the tragedy of Istvaan. And so, as usual, for the very basics, let us lean on existing wisdom. To quote, Vulkan's imprisonment. Vulkan had survived the nuclear fire of the Iron Warrior's orbital strike, where so many of his sons did not. Finding himself surrounded by hundreds of traitor legionnaires from both the Night Lords and the Iron Warriors, Vulkan resigned himself to his fate. Fighting valiantly, the Primarch fought to the death, but was eventually overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of the enemy and was shot, stabbed and bludgeoned into unconsciousness. The Night Haunter, Conrad Kurz, now inherently insane, saw the opportunity to torment his fallen brother and took the unconscious Vulkan as his prisoner. When the Salamander's Primarch finally awoke, he found himself fettered in massive chains aboard a jail hulk belonging to the 8th Legion. Over the span of several months, the Night Haunter took sadistic pleasure in attempting to break both Vulkan's body and mind, or kill him outright. But the task proved impossible, as every time Kurz thought he had succeeded in killing his brother, Vulkan's body would miraculously regenerate to its former healthy state. Vulkan had been revealed to be a perpetual, a being who was capable of continuous cellular regeneration and therefore was effectively immortal, much like their father, the Emperor of Mankind. Finally enraged, Kurz took it upon himself to kill Vulkan as many times as necessary to permanently rid himself of his intolerable presence. The Night Haunter personally beheaded the Salamander's Primarch, ripped out his throat with a piece of cutlery, stabbed him through the chest and virtually tore him limb from limb with his own wicked claws. When these attempts failed to kill Vulkan, Kurz had him eviscerated, shot at close range by hundreds of bolters, put into a ventilation shaft of a starship's engine, and even stripped naked and thrown out of an airlock into the airless void of space. But the Night Haunter's efforts proved all for naught. Each time Conrad thought he had successfully murdered his brother Primarch, Vulkan's body would continue to regenerate back to its former vigorous state, further enraging Conrad. With his unnatural abilities to regenerate revealed to him, Kurz attempted to make Vulkan admit that he was no less a monster than himself. Vulkan was forced through unwinnable trials to break his spirit, having to pull against chains to prevent a ceiling in another cell from crushing its innocent occupants, being starved at a banquet table with mortal prisoners alongside him, watching the food decay and the prisoners wither away, being trapped in a battle plate and being unable to control his limbs, and forced to hunt captured soldiers and other captured loyalist Astartes. To further torment his brother, the Night Haunter had Davinite sorcerer priests use the fell powers gifted to him by the ruinous powers to ensnare Vulkan's mind and make him fight his brother Korax after a fictional rescue attempt. But even this form of sorcerous torture failed to break the resolve of Vulkan. Fed up with his insufferable prisoner and slaughtering the sorcerer priests, the Night Haunter devised a final solution to his problem of ridding himself of the Salamander's presence. Vulkan's fate would be decided in a duel to the death. He offered his brother a means of escaping and achieving that which he had sought for so long, his freedom. All he had to do was navigate a labyrinth where, at the center of it, lay his personal warhammer, Dawnbringer. But this was no ordinary maze. At the request of the Night Haunter, the Iron Warrior's Primarch Perturabo had crafted him a singular prison, unlike any other. In imitation of his own private sanctorum known as the Cavia Ferrum. This special prison was an elaborate labyrinth whose featureless walls and strange geometric designs made it all but impossible to map and therefore escape. Anyone who attempted to mentally map the labyrinth would be hopelessly knotted in turns that should have been physically impossible. Even after trying scores of times to map the labyrinth, an individual would only manage more than a handful of turns within its twisting corridors before it all stopped making sense. In addition, Curse performed ambush attacks, wounding Vulkan without killing him repeatedly. At the edge of his willpower, Vulkan had a vision of the Emperor in the visage of a remembrancer named Verus. The Emperor reminded his son that he would watch over all of his sons when he could, and calmed Vulkan's mind, instilling within him fresh resolve. Thus Vulkan goaded Curse, yelling out into the cavernous labyrinth of how all the Primarchs pitied him, and how he was just a child raging in the dark. Curse then opened up a pathway in the labyrinth to the center, where Dawnbringer rested upon an energy shield. There he met the Night Haunter, and they engaged in melee combat, mano a mano. Though armed with a blade, Curse gave in to Vulkan's taunts of his physical weakness and attempted to engage Vulkan with his fists alone. Vulkan easily grabbed Curse and, swinging him like a hammer, broke the energy shield. With his weapon in hand, he managed to overpower his jailer and activate the secret personal teleporter device into the head of the finely wrought Warhammer. Vulkan immediately transported halfway across the galaxy and reappeared in the upper atmosphere of the Ultramarines Legion homeworld of Macragge. As he fell from an impossible height, his body was burned to a crisp upon re-entry. But before his mind faded into blackness, Vulkan was content that he would soon find himself whole once again and in the care of his Ultramarine cousins. His violent orbital entry crippled his mind due to the immense pain, making him mentally unstable. Later on, the Night Haunter, Conrad, who was trapped aboard the Dark Angel's flagship following a failed boarding action during the conclusion of the Thramas Crusade, would eventually make his way to the surface of Macragge, wanting to finish what he started, and finally, kill Vulkan. The ensuing battle would draw in both his Primarch brothers, Reboot Gilliman and Lion L. Johnson, and a perpetual by the name of John Grammaticus. In the aftermath, the Night Haunter would be defeated, but Vulkan was apparently slain by Grammaticus, by the command of the mysterious organization known as the Cabal. Vulkan was stabbed in the heart by Grammaticus with a piece of fulgurite, a large natural hollow glass tube formed beneath the surface of a planet during a lightning strike, the result of the Emperor unleashing his infinite psychic power against the forces of chaos millennia ago. Vulkan's fate following the battle at that time was unknown. As Macragge became the new home of the Imperium Secundus, the second stellar empire of humanity created by the Ultramarines Primarch Reboot, more and more survivors of the 18th Legion made their way to the Ultramarines' homeworld. Convinced of their Primarch's death, the Salamanders mourned their genetic sire's loss. The Ultramarines had entombed Vulkan in a heavily decorated casket of pure gold, a fitting resting place for one of the Emperor's sons, or so one would think. To the Salamanders standing vigil over Vulkan's body, the cold mortuary chamber in which he now rested was a far cry from the burial rites of the Promethean cult. For all intent and purposes, the Salamanders were a broken legion, the death of their Primarch having finally broken their indomitable spirit. However, matters soon changed when First Captain Artelus Numeon was successfully saved by an Ultramarine strike force. Many were those amongst the survivors that hoped that the return of their first captain would give a new sense of purpose to what remained of the Legion. given them purpose and direction once again. Numeon firmly believed in his Primarch's survival, having constantly espoused the phrase, "Vulkan lives." This became Numeon's battle cry, and the cornerstone of his beliefs. Yet when Numeon asked to be taken to his Primarch, he only found an empty casket, Vulkan's body having mysteriously vanished from his final resting place, which planted the seed of doubt amongst Numeon's fellow Astartes, officers and Primarchs, as to Vulkan's true condition. Ah, poor Vulkan. The war of the soul versus Conrad. Akin to the plot of The Killing Joke, the contest was not merely to break Vulkan, or to gain satisfaction from his pain. It was to prove to Vulkan that he was, in fact, no different to Conrad, certainly no better. The constant killing and confusion, the attempt to drive Vulkan mad, and thus prove Conrad validated in his own situation, his own weaknesses. For Conrad maintained that any who had been brought up as he was would have turned to his path, that his other brothers were but the products of their history as well, no better, just more fortuitous in their history. Yet the resolve of Vulkan, the humility of him, the humanity of this mighty son of the Emperor, it was more than enough for the trials the Night Haunter put him through. Conrad had lost so much of his own humanity that he could not recognize the strength it gave to this Hercules. The pain he experienced for others, the need to defend them, the right of the matter, was so ingrained into Vulkan that it mattered little what Conrad tried, for he was now utterly unable to understand where the strength came from, the unshakable resolve. How such a gentle soul could not be shattered as his legion had been. Conrad would never be able to defeat the kindness and compassion that were every bit as much a part of Vulkan's makeup as the genetic enhancements. For he was truly the most human of all of the Primarchs. Personally, I have always found it strange that both he and the angel, Sanguinius, were the most outwardly tainted by mutation. In the modern Imperium, if they were not beings of legend, they will be burnt at the stake. Yet these two beings who wore their otherness on their very visage, undeniably, undistinguishable, the wings of the one, the night colour and red eyes of the other. Of all of the Primarchs, these two were the most obvious in their otherness, yet deep down, they were by far the most human. Ironic as always. The Warhammer setting is naught more than a Greek tragedy, with official keys being switched. Poor Conrad. For with each failed attempt, he watched more of his own self-generated explanations and excuses for his own depths being stripped away. For Vulkan would never bow to his wishes, would never betray who he was. And it killed something in Conrad. And some might say that the torture was far worse for the inflictor than the inflicted. A truly sad and pathetic event. Now, and back to the narrative. After several city-wide search actions had returned empty-handed, Numeon himself found the missing Primarch's body resting in a statuary garden. None could explain how the body had been overlooked, or how it had gotten there, but Reboot Gilliman soon assumed the reason to be a malfunction of the teleportation device inside of Vulkan's Warhammer, Dawnbringer, which the Primarch had been entombed with. For many of the Salamanders, however, this first miracle only confirmed Numeon's faith and beliefs. Coming together, the 67 surviving Salamanders formed a new brotherhood, the Pyre, and declared their intent. They would attempt to break through the ruin storm to return Vulkan to Nocturne, either to be properly laid to rest or to be resurrected. This was the fate they had chosen for themselves, and nothing, not even Lord Gulliman's refusal to let them leave, would keep them from it. Fortunately for the Pyre, an 18th Legion ship, the battle barge Charybdis, was docked in Port Hera and undergoing final repairs. With the blessings of the Primarch Sanguinius, Emperor of Imperium Secundus, and with the tacit agreement of its Lord Protector, Lionel Johnson, and, at last, that of Reboot Gilliman. Vulkan's casket was transferred aboard the Charybdis. And now we shall pause our retelling of the tale of Vulkan and move to one of the leading lights of the Salamanders. So few of them had survived the trap, the betrayal at Istvaan. They needed to shine so very, very brightly. And thankfully, they did. Artelus Numeon. We have all burned. Down in the fire pits, or from the brand as iron in the solitarium, we have all touched the flame. It leaves scars, even for us. We carry them proudly, with honour. But the scars we took that day on that battlefield, we bear only with shame and regret. They are a memorial in flesh, a physical reminder of everything we have lost. A burn even we fireborn cannot endure without pain. Artelus Numeon, Captain of the Pyre Guard. Artelus Numeon was a Terran-born Astartes officer who served as the first captain of the Salamanders Legions' elite first company, known as the Fire Drakes. Throughout the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, he also served as equerry to the Primarch and commanded Vulkan's elite personal honor guard, the Pyre Guard, which was comprised of veteran battle brothers of the Salamanders Legion. Sworn to protect the Primarch, these were warriors set apart from the rest of the 18th Legion. Terran-born like their commander, they did not always fully appreciate the earthy sentiments of the Nocturnian culture in which Vulkan had been raised, but they knew their duty deep within their genetically enhanced bones. Numeon was present during the tragic battle of the drop site Massacre on Istvaan V, where his legion was nearly destroyed. He survived the traitor's trap and eventually made his way off the Scoured Planet to carry on the war against the War Master Horus's traitor legions. The Pyre Guard. When Vulkan was reunited with his legion, he saw the potential in his few remaining Terran sons. From amongst the survivors, he chose the most stoic and fiercely independent warriors, those who had endured the worst of the 18th Legion's trials and tribulations throughout the early years of the Great Crusade, before he had been reunited with them. For these chosen few, the Primarch founded the Pyre Guard, his personal honor guard, charged with the protection of their Primarch and to act as his inner circle of advisors. Set apart from the other warriors of the 18th Legion, all of the vaunted Pyre Guard were without equal. These individual warriors were hungry, ready for war. Like the deep drakes of Vulkan's homeworld, they were savage and fierce, sharp of claw and tooth. The members of the Pyre Guard were not like other salamanders. They had more fire, more fury. Like the volcanoes of ancient Nocturne, the great jagged chains of the Dragon Spike and Mount Deathfire, they were perpetually on the brink of eruption. Even the warriors of the Pyre class were not as volatile. The Pyre Guard were chosen warriors, those that displayed a level of self-sacrifice and self-sufficiency that exceeded all others. Like the samurai of old Nihon, they were fighters foremost, who could ally as a unit or function expertly on their own. They were also leaders, and each Pyre Guard commanded a chapter of the Legion, in addition to their duties as the Primarch's inner circle warriors. Numeon was one of those chosen elite. Though Terran-born, these elite warriors still displayed the physical traits of onyx black skin and red eyes, an irresistible reaction to the unique radiation of Nocturne, combined with the genetic heritage of their Primarch, which every salamander, regardless of origin, possesses. The Pyre Guard's number always stood at 7, a number of great cultural significance to the people of Nocturne. When they marched to war with their Primarch, every one of their personal weapons was forged by its bearer, and every one could spit fire like the drakes of old. Flight of the Fire Ark. With the full treachery of the traitor legions revealed, and the whereabouts of Vulkan unknown, Numeon saw the retreat was the only viable strategy remaining. Droves of Loyalist survivors fell back to the drop site, trying to climb aboard ships that were surging desperately into the sky to outreach the terrible storm of betrayal below. It was not a rout, though for any force other than the Legiones Astartes it would have been. Faced with such violence, many were cut down as the traitors threaded the air with enough flak to wither in a marder. Groaning, feeling the extent of every one of his many injuries, and ignoring the urgent cascade of damage reports scrolling down the left side of his one still functioning retinal lens, Numeon staggered to his feet. A piece of armor, one he knew well and had seen before, lay within his grasp. He took the sigil once worn by Vulkan and tucked it into his belt. His Pyre Guard brother, Leodrak, was with him, but he couldn't see Vulkan or the rest of the Pyre Guard. Smoke blackened the ridge, and the ashfall had intensified. Heat haze from the still-burning fire blurred his vision. He saw the crater. He had been thrown back from its epicenter, and the hundreds of twisted bodies within. They were incinerated, fused into their armor. Some were still dying. Numeon knew he had to reach a dropship. He had to save himself and Leodrak. They must have slipped into a narrow defile that had shielded their bodies from the fire. Numeon assumed that he had blacked out. There were fragments, pieces that he did not possess in his eidetic memory of what happened after the missile strike. He remembered Leodrak calling out his brother's name, but Skatava had not answered. None of the Pyre Guard were answering. Finally reaching the drop site with Leodrak, Numeon found visibility was almost zero. Like tar turned into air, the darkness, the blackness was virtually absolute. Auto sensors were of limited use, but Numeon managed to get as far as a ship. Leodrak was retching in the vile smoke, so thick it would have killed a lesser man. He clung to Numeon's left shoulder and let the pyre captain guide him, but Numeon was struggling too. The dropship was close enough to touch, but the filth besieging them made it impossible to gauge the location of the entrance ramp, or if it was even open. Out of the darkness a hand reached for them, and together they stumbled onto the deck of a crowded Stormbird. It was black within the lander. Smoke was also filling the hold and the internal lighting was out. Numeon slumped and rolled onto his back, his eyes burning like someone had thrust a knife into it and twisted the blade. It was more badly wounded than he had at first realized, having taken several hits during the descent as he shielded his Pyre Guard brother from harm. Leodrak was on his knees, coughing up the wretched smoke from his lungs, and then unconsciousness took him, and he was lost to it. Verad Pergelen, one of the Iron Hand's elite honor guard, known as the Morlocks, had saved Numeon and Leodrak's lives on the plains of Isstvan 5. So few of the Morlocks had escaped, so very few of the Iron Hand's clan Averni left to continue its great and noble legacy. When the shells were falling and the full horror of the betrayal revealed, it was Pergelen who had fought his way back to the dropships when other Iron Hands were losing their minds at the death of their Primarch Ferris Manus. The survivors of István 5 had been a mess of disparate units and legions. Not all had survived the escape. Some were simply too badly wounded or had been dead when they were dragged aboard. Of the 47 legionnaires that took flight on that vessel, only 26 survived. They lived long enough to be reunited with the Fire Ark, a Salamander strike cruiser that had escaped the carnage, one of the few. It had not done so unscathed. Many of the crew were killed during that desperate flight. Wounded, weary, they had levelled what guns they had on the dropships emerging from that self-same chaos, not realizing they were friends, not foes. There were no legionaries aboard, not one. Every single able-bodied warrior that could don warplate had been sent to bring the disgraced War Master Horus to heel. It was extravagant, Numeon realized in retrospect, a means of showing force to force, and hoping the latter balked in the face of the former. How wrong they were. It did not seem like extravagance now. Instead, it smacked of ignorant sacrifice. and how Horus had prepared his altar for their willing offering. The blades of his traitors were sharp indeed on that slab of Isstvan 5. Since finding the Fire Ark and the brave but depleted crew aboard, they had lost 3 more legionaries. Numeon had allied them together, given them back some semblance of purpose. But it did not come without risk, and a vein of fatalism was growing in his company. He had expected it of the Iron Hands. They bore the loss of their Primarch with a quiet and steely determination that did the Medusans much credit. No, it was the Nocturnians, the sons of Vulkan, that suffered most. Of all the Salamanders, only Numeon believed. In his heart, he knew that his father had survived. The rest, despite his impassioned arguments, were not so convinced, and fought for vengeance instead of hope and a desire to serve. Numeon knew these men were broken, bereft of leadership. They would have destroyed one another, and with no way to return to their legions, they were cut adrift and aimless. Their vessel, the Fire Ark, had been badly damaged in the exodus from Istvaan 5. Some weapon systems were still functional, though these were insufficient to last long against a fully operational ship of the same caliber. Life support, power for lighting on certain decks, the engines and warp drive still worked, albeit at a reduced and unreliable capacity. Communications were another matter, however. Shipboard Vox worked well enough, but long-distance augers and the sensorium arrays were beyond repair and use. Even ship-to-surface Vox was extremely patchy. Captain Halder had achieved the near impossible in effecting a successful escape, but they had limped on ever since and knew nothing of the Greater War, or even if there was a Greater War. For all they knew, everyone was dead, and Horus had won. Numeon refused to believe that, just as he refused to believe the Vulkan had died along with Lord Manus. He had seen the Primarch fall, but the news from their fellow survivors who had was compelling as it was grim. They would fight on, hoping that others did too. Pursuit of the Word-Bearers. The months that followed saw the Fire Ark embark on a series of hit-and-run attacks on the traitor forces. During their guerrilla campaign, the survivors of the Fire Ark had come across the world of Viralis. The entire planet was filled with corpse-filled streets, bodies defiled and mutilated in service to the Dark Powers. The traitors had left something else behind as well. The few survivors had been greatly changed, human no longer. They had become things. The lawyers soon discovered that the perpetrator of this horrific atrocity was none other than the hated Word-Bearers Legion, specifically a dark apostle named Valdrek Elias, who was sworn to the service of First Chaplain Erebus. The survivors of the Fire Ark soon tracked the whereabouts of the cleric to the world of Traores. They had discovered that the Word-Bearers had been tracking a frontier archaeologist named Kieran Sebaton to an ancient fortification. They were intent on acquiring an unknown object from the dig site of an ancient fortress. Though the loyalists were unsure as to the purpose of the Word-Bearers' presence on the planet, they intended to save Traores from suffering the same fate as Viralis. 23 legionnaires comprised Numeon's disparate company, himself included. It was barely more than 2 squads. The majority were Salamanders, mainly lined warriors and a few pyroclasts, as well as himself and Leodric from the Pyre Guard. A pair of battle brothers and Codicia Hriak represented the Raven Guard, and of the Iron Hands Legion, there were only Domadus and Pergelen. Ever since the evacuation from the Istvaan 5 killing fields, there had been no contact with any other Legion force. Over the course of a few weeks, as events played out, Numeon's warriors saved the mortal Sebaton. After intense scrutiny and the invasive psychic scrying of Codicia Hriak, the archaeologist revealed that he was the mysterious individual known as John Grammaticus, a human operative of the mysterious Xenos organization called the Cabal. and had been genetically altered by them to become what they referred to as a perpetual, a being who was capable of regenerating and therefore was effectively immortal, much like the Emperor of Mankind. He stated he had been tasked to come to Traores to obtain a relic from the ancient ruins of a fortress built by Chaos cultists millennia ago. Within the fortress was buried a spear, though not a spear as such. This so-called spear was a piece of fulgurite, a fork of lightning crystallized in rock. The Dark Apostle hoped to obtain it in order to utilize the divine power within to ascend to demonhood. Grammaticus also informed Numeon that the relic had something to do with the Salamanders' Primarch Vulkan, but as to what, he could not say. Though initially distrustful of the strange mortal, Numeon relented and attempted to help Grammaticus escape off-world. The remaining loyalists were being hunted by the relentless word-bearer's huntsman, Barthuza Narek, a servant of the Dark Apostle Elias, as well as the Chaos cultists of Traores. Over the course of making their way towards Traores' lone spaceport, many of the surviving legionaries were killed. The Raven Guard had hidden their Thunderhawk gunship within the lightning fields located on the high peaks that surrounded the spaceport, while some of the surviving loyalists futilely attacked the spaceport in order to draw the bulk of the encroaching word-bearers away. Numeon, Grammaticus, and Shiak made their way towards the hidden gunship. Unfortunately, Narek and two of his fellow word-bearers followed them, having tracked the Raven Guard's psychic spore. The Raven Guard willingly sacrificed himself as he confronted the encroaching traitor marines. As Numeon went to assist Grammaticus, the mortal utilized a laser digital weapon and fired it into one of Numeon's retinal lenses, burning out his eye and searing his face beneath. The trauma of it put him to his knees. Half-blinded, Numeon snatched for the human. Grammaticus took the fulgurite from Numeon's scabbard, deftly avoiding the Salamander's grab. Before the human departed, he wanted to know only one thing. Did Vulkan truly live? The mortal believed that he did. Suddenly, the pyre captain convulsed as he was shot by a bolt pistol from behind. Grammaticus froze in place as he was confronted by the Dark Apostle Elias himself, who stood on the lowered ramp of the gunship. Without warning, a tear in reality appeared before them, the form of Erebus stepping forth. Elias thought that his master had come to help him achieve his ascension. Handing over the fulgurite relic, Erebus lashed out with the lightning spear and slit the other Dark Apostle's throat. Elias sank to his knees, dying, unable to staunch the grievous wound from the god weapon. Erebus had killed his former servant for attempting to betray him. Erebus then ordered Grammaticus to take the relic, making no attempt to stop him. Cautiously, Grammaticus took the proffered relic and departed Traores in the lone gunship. Regaining consciousness despite his severe wounds and the loss of his right eye, Numeon attempted to reach the Fire Ark, which had miraculously survived this far, but was instead captured by another company of the Word-Bearers. Imprisoned on board the Demagogue, a hunter-class destroyer belonging to the fleet of Dark Apostle Quargalak, and tortured over several months by the Dark Apostle's lieutenants, a demon-possessed word-bearer that answered to the name of Zenuth Sul. Numeon's mind was stretched to its very limits and beyond. It became quickly apparent that the unburdened sought information on the whereabouts both of the fulgurite stone and that of the traitor Barthuza Narek, who had been tasked with retrieving the fulgurite, but had since betrayed his legion for unknown reasons. Numeon witnessed firsthand the depths in which the word-bearers had sunk, as the demagogue resembled more a flying sacrificial altar for Zenuth Sul and Kaor Galak to conduct their unholy bidden rites than a worship of the Legionaries Astartes. Fortunately for Numeon, the demagogue and its sister ship, the Dark Sacrament, were attacked by a strike cruiser of the Ultramarines Legion, later identified as the Defiance of Kalth. The Defiance of Kalth's attack, having disrupted whatever blasphemous rite had allowed Kaor Galak to manifest himself aboard the demagogue, Numeon succeeded in freeing himself from the restraints chaining him to the sacrificial altar, and although very weak, he decided to seek out revenge and retrieve Vulkan's sigil from the dead hands of Zenith Sul, who had taken it from him. Freed, Numeon was surrounded by the corpses of loyalist legionnaires which were already dead. As he looked around the grim abattoir, he encountered one survivor of the Iron Hands, who had been mercilessly tortured and brutalized by his word-bearer's captors. Numeon ended up killing the grievously wounded legionary as a final act of mercy, promising him that he would make the word-bearers pay before seeking out his chosen target. Meanwhile, the Dark Sacrament was burning as the Ultramarines of the Red Marked Company, led by their charismatic and battle-hardened leader, Sergeant Thiel, had also boarded the Demagogue. Discovering the sacrificial altars within the torture cell, Sergeant Thiel quickly realized that one of the prisoners had escaped. Thiel led his squad for the bridge, realizing that whoever had been imprisoned would likely be seeking to settle their score with the commander of the ship. Having scavenged a bolt pistol and a combat blade from dead word-bearers, Numeon had thus far managed to head to the bridge unopposed, but was now blocked by a legionary in full battle plate, standing guard in front of the bridge. Half-naked and ill-equipped, Numeon prepared himself for a futile if glorious charge, when the word-bearer was killed by disciplined bolt of fire from Thiel's strike team. Storming the bridge on his own, Numeon found Zenithal alone and prepared to confront him. When Thiel and his Ultramarines interrupted him, seized Zenithal and retrieved Vulkan's sigil without a fight, Numeon was then transferred to the Apothecarian of the Defiance of Kalth to have his wounds attended to, while the ship made its way to the heart of Ultramar, to Magna Macragge, Civitas, and the fortress of Hera, where Vulkan's body had been entombed since his death at the hand of Bartusa Marek. During the short journey, something akin to friendship quickly developed between Thiel and Numeon. The Ultramarine Sergeant informed Numeon of the events that had taken place since the Battle of Kalth, and of the struggles the realm of Ultramar now faced, and of Reboot Gilliman's initiative to declare Terra as having fallen, and the Primarch's proclamation to begin Imperium Secundus. More importantly, he told Numeon of Vulkan's apparent madness following his month-long torture at the hands of his former brother Primarch, Conrad Kurz, the murderous Primarch of the Night Lords, and his Primarch's eventual death. Despite this dire news, Numeon refused to believe in Vulkan's demise, convinced that Vulkan lived and might ultimately still be restored to life. However, Thiel did warn Numeon that the Ultramarines had Vulkan's presumed killer in custody, and that their new prisoner, Zenith Sul, would soon suffer a similar fate. Upon reaching Macragge, Numeon discovered that he was not the only son of Vulkan to have reached the homeworld of the 8th Legion, nor were the Salamanders the only Shattered Legion present on Macragge. Delegations of Iron Hands and Raven Guard were also present, as well-known figures of the White Scars and even the Space Wolves. But supreme amongst the Loyalists were the triumvirate of Ultramarines, Dark Angels and Blood Angels, the legions of the founders of the new Imperium, the Imperium Secundus. While Numeon's return was celebrated with due rejoice, the sad certainty of Vulkan's death overshadowed the reunion between Numeon and his brothers. Almost upon arrival, Numeon demanded to be taken to his Primarch's resting place. Escorted by 2 of his brothers, Numeon reached the vault where Vulkan's body had been laid to rest in an ornate golden casket, only to find that the Primarch's mortal remains had mysteriously vanished. Neither Numeon nor the Honor Guard standing vigil around their Primarch had seen or heard anything, which only served to deepen the mystery of the Primarch's true state. Almost immediately, search parties from the Ultramarines' most elite troops, the Invictus Guard, were dispatched to cover the entire fortress and city. But in the initial phase, the Salamanders were purposefully kept from joining the search. It would take a personal audience of Numeon, rightly regarded as the de facto Legion Master of the Salamanders, being the sole surviving senior officer of the 18th, having been saved from the black sands of Isstvan V, to sway the minds of both Lord Guilliman and that of the new Emperor, the Primarch Sanguinius of the Blood Angels. Numeon argued his case with charisma, and although he failed in convincing the gathered 3 Primarchs of Vulkan's return to life, the Salamanders were permitted to search for their lost Primarch. Their efforts would, however, largely be in vain. Nevertheless, this episode marked a decisive turn of events for the Sons of Vulkan. Firstly, because the enterprise they showed in questioning for their missing Primarch served to strengthen and renew the bonds of brotherhood between these scattered survivors, and secondly, because more and more of these legionaries were now looking to Numeon for guidance and leadership. Some of the legionaries had even started believing in Numeon's mantra, "Vulkan lives," and that their Primarch may indeed still be alive. But this new uplifting spirit was soon sorely tested when Titus Praeto, among the most senior librarians of the Ultramarines, revealed to Numeon and his closest advisors the full and horrible truth about the Primarch's arrival on Macragge, that Vulkan had truly died upon arriving on the Ultramarines' homeworld, and had miraculously come back to life shortly afterwards to battle against the Night Lord's murderous Primarch Conrad Kurz, but also that the trauma he had experienced had bereft Vulkan of his sanity. Ultimately, Titus Praeto revealed a final secret that Reboot Guilliman had not shared with Vulkan's sons, that the man behind Vulkan's murder, the word-bearer Batusa Narek, was imprisoned within the fortress of Hera, and that Xanath Sul had also been transferred there. Numeon ultimately grew to the task of leadership he had never desired, to lead what remained of the 18th Legion. As an exterior symbol of his new responsibilities, Numeon was presented with a new suit of power armor, a Salamander's forged suit befitting of a Legion consul, and armed with the very best weapons at their disposal. Chaplain Varkir had relinquished his ornate bolt pistol, the bronze-chased and serpent-headed Basilisk, while Sergeant Zytos had presented the Legion Master with his own sword, an artificer-wrought chainsword forged from the teeth of the mighty Nocturnian salamander, Draconius. Thus armed and armoured, Numeon would lead his brothers on their first mission, the interrogation of Batusa Narek. By the time a Thunderhawk gunship was summoned to take the small party to the eastern keep of the Fortress of Hera, pandemonium had broken out. Unknown to his captors, Xanath Sul had been one of the dreaded Unburdened, the elite demonically possessed warriors of the Word-Bearer's Legion, who had now utilized his unnatural powers to free himself and gone on to rampage through the prison facility. The sacrifice of the Demagogue and the Dark Sacrament, his own capture and transfer to the Eastern Keep had all been done willingly, so as to get closer to his intended target, the renegade Batusa Narek, from which his somber master, the Dark Apostle, Keor Gallic, hoped to learn the secrets and powers of the Fulgurite Stone. In the company of Eonid Thiel and one of the Red-Marked, Numeon raced after Xanath Sul to confront him, but the Unburdened was faster and reached Narek's cell first. Thiel, one of his warriors and Numeon, stormed the cell to confront the Word-Bearer's legionary inside, only to realize that they were confronting Xanath Sul and not Batusa Narek. Revealing his true demonic nature, Xanath Sul attacked the Loyalists, knocking Thiel unconscious and killing his companion. Numeon lashed out with his new blade, Draconius, and severely wounded Sul, but the blade remained trapped in the demonic flesh of his opponent, effectively disarming him. Numeon was forced to fall back and utilize his secondary blade, an Ultramarines Gladius, to desperately fight for his life. Xanath Sul pressed his advantage and sought an easy kill, but hesitated when confronted with Vulkan's sigil, which gave the arriving legionaries, comprised of the Salamanders Zytos and Varkir, and 2 Ultramarines guards, more than enough time to rake the Unburdened with deadly bolt of fire. Hurled back by the deluge of shells, Xanath Sul staggered, giving Sergeant Thiel enough time to regain his senses, and launching another attack. Hard-pressed by both Thiel and Numeon, Zenithul was finally vanquished when Numeon retrieved Draconius from its unholy flesh and beheaded the foul creature. Batu's and Narek's escape resulted in a renewed city-wide search, but as for the search for the Primarch of the Salamanders, both parties of Ultramarines and Salamanders returned empty-handed. With their only lead on their Primarch's whereabouts now lost to them, the surviving Salamanders gathered together in council. The new Brotherhood of the 66 surviving sons of Vulkan took the name of the Pyre, and now, more than ever, looked to Numeon for guidance. Narek's escape and the disappearance of their father's body left them precious little reason to stay on Macragge. Most of them desired to undertake the perilous journey back to their home world of Nocturne. But most of these survivors of the 18th Legion refused to be treated as a mere tool of propaganda for the Ultramarines' new Imperium. However, Numeon, overwhelmed by grief over the repeated loss of his Primarch, refused the position that was offered to him and isolated himself to mourn in one of Magna Macragge's former cemeteries. Seeking solitude, Numeon instead encountered the Primarch of the Dark Angels, Lion L. Johnson, the new Lord Protector of Imperium Secundus. Far from trying to convince Numeon of remaining on Macragge, the Lion confessed his doubts regarding the fall of Terra and reminded Numeon of his duties as the new Legion Master of the Salamanders. Still reluctant, Numeon answered him that he had neither desire nor claim to that title. Upon which the Primarch of the First Legion answered the Numeons was the only true claim. Although their causes might have seemed lost or futile, they were still warriors of the Imperium, and their oaths and honor demanded that their quest should nevertheless be accomplished. Left alone with his thoughts and broken dreams, Numeon wandered in the cemetery until he encountered an honorary statue of Ferrus Manus, the slain Primarch of the Iron Hands. Denied his vengeance and single hope, Numeon let his bitterness flow, but was struck by silence as his eyes fell on another statue. There in the shadows, sitting upon a marble throne, was Vulkan's body. Reunited with his Primarch, Numeon's convictions grew strong. Vulkan would be restored. Not on Macragge, but on their home world. The Salamanders would bring Vulkan's body back to Nocturne. The Odyssey of the Charybdis. With the miraculous recovery of their Primarch's body, the Salamanders soon went forward with their plans and departed Macragge to attempt the perilous voyage to Nocturne. Under normal circumstances, this would already have been a long and arduous voyage, but since the Ruin Storm, the immense warp storm that was ritualistically summoned by the word-bearers on Karth, warp travel had proved erratic at best and deadly at worst. The Ruin Storm was not only dangerous because of the powerful warp turbulences it had brought with it, but because it occluded the light of the Astronomicon, and thus rendered navigators practically blind, which successfully impeded all warp traffic. Macragge was the only known exception to this, as it had been, for lack of a better word, lit up by the Xenos artifact known as the Fire Ark, located beneath the largest peak on the world of Sotha. As Nocturne lacked both the light of the Pharos and that of the Astronomicon, the Salamanders' quest to reach their home world was not only inherently dangerous, but it would also likely prove to be fatal. It was no surprise that Reboot Guilliman appeared reluctant to let the Salamanders so easily depart Macragge and his new Imperium. However, Reboot Guilliman's position had been severely weakened by the inability of his most elite warriors both to recapture the fugitive Bartus of Narek and to relocate the corpse of his slain brother. Furthermore, Macragge and Ultramar still needed rebuilding, and on a purely strategic matter, the 66 Salamanders would hardly make a difference. Leaderless, the Salamanders had been easily subdued, but the emergence of Artelus Numeon as their new Legion Master, the Salamanders' reputed stubbornness would prove difficult to overcome. In a private audience with the Lord of the Ultramarines, Numeon made it clear that the Salamanders intended to leave Ultramar, with or without Guilliman's blessings. Although he would try to convince Numeon to stay on Macragge, in the end, Guilliman would let the Salamanders depart unhindered. The Charybdis was a venerable vessel, a battle barge, and more importantly than her size and the sheer power of her formidable arsenal, the Charybdis was a survivor. Never would she be considered beautiful or majestic. War had branded her as surely and indelibly as any fireborn. Despite her aesthetic imperfections, the Charybdis did have something going for her. She was unyielding. Few ships of the 18th Legion escaped the atrocity at Istvaan 5. Her flanks were scored and dented. Burns marked most of her dorsal aspect. Gouges in her hull had been sealed and resealed, then patched with ablative armour. She was scorched and beaten, battered and bruised, but like her legion, the Charybdis endured. Although her previous captain had also died above Istvaan 5, her new bridge crew under Shipmaster Kolo Adician and Lieutenant Arik Gulero, though young, were both experienced and battle-hardened. Guilliman had offered to dispatch ships to escort her to the edge of Ultramar, but Numeon had refused, and so the Charybdis would begin her journey and brave the dangers of the Immaterium alone. Shortly before her departure, while Artelus Numeon was still contemplating the ship that would take him back to Nocturne, the leader of the pyre is joined by Eonid Thiel. Like his Primarch, Thiel did not believe that Vulkan could rise again, but in Numeon he saw a worthy successor to the Lord of Drakes. A strong leader for a broken legion. Despite the lack of armed escorts, the beginning of Charybdis's voyage was without incident. On the edge of the Macragge system, the Salamanders encountered evidence of where a major naval battle had taken place, leaving an immense debris field through which the battle barge had to navigate to reach the ship's Mandeville point. At the heart of this desolation lay a gargantuan shipwreck, vastly superior in size to the Gloriana-class battleship, one of the dreaded vessels of the Word-bearers, an Abyss-class battleship. As the Charybdis was clearing the debris field, they received an Imperial distress code emanating from a civilian fuel depot designated as Rampart, which had come under attack by a vessel of the 14th Legion, the Death Guard. Closing with the depot, the Charybdis identified the enemy vessel as a Gladius-class light cruiser, the Necrotor, which had already launched landers to assault the civilian station. This placed the Salamanders in a dire quandary. Although the Charybdis immensely outgunned the Necrotor, the Salamander's vessel was woefully undermanned, leaving it vulnerable to eventual boarding actions. However, Zytos and Zathan would not readily let a chance such as this to exact retribution on those who had betrayed their legion on the sands of Istvaan to pass. Further communications also revealed the presence of an unknown space marine operating alone on Rampart and opposing the Death Guard. Despite being more than likely outnumbered, the Salamanders organized a landing party, which would be led by Numeon. Both sergeants agreed upon this course of action, as Numeon had been standing vigil over their Primarch's body, and mourning him ever since their departure from Port Hera. Zathan and Zytos would not risk the full complement of Astartes aboard the Charybdis, and so, merely 12 legionaries in a single gunship, the Draconius, would make the descent to aid the beleaguered civilians. These 12 would, however, include Numeon, both Zathan and Zytos, Epistolary Usherman, and Techmarine Farquhar Zon, a powerful strike force. Using her long-repressed psychic gifts, Usherman screened the station beyond telepathically, confirming the presence of the unknown Astartes and the Death Guard's usual brutality, which in all likeliness had released toxic agents inside Rampart. However, overwhelmed by the psychic link, Usherman began to lose control, prompting actions from another legionary who knocked him out as a matter of precaution. Thus deprived of perhaps their most powerful asset within their small group, the Salamanders reached Rampart. Just before landing, Zathan and Zytos exchanged their opinions on Numeon's ability to lead. While having fully recovered, physically speaking, Numeon had failed to step forth and take command of operations, or assume true leadership as both sergeants had hoped. This blooding on Rampart would not merely be an act of vengeance. It would be the anvil upon which Artelus Numeon would be broken or reforged in the fire of battle. Setting foot on Rampart, the Salamanders found the landing zone desolate, with no Death Guard present to challenge their approach. Rhythan and Zytos' hopes were almost immediately deceived, as Numeon stepped down and left command to Zytos. Hiding his anger as well he could, Zytos ordered his squad to split into 5-man combat squads, a novelty for the 18th Legion, which almost always had deployed only en masse since their reunification under Vulkan in the Great Crusade. However, each and every legionary present had been a survivor of Isstvan V, and by then was well used to such guerrilla tactics. Since entering the station proper, the Salamanders had discovered traces and evidence of some toxic or viral agents being utilized by the Death Guard. A long-standing rivalry had always existed between the Death Guard and the Salamanders, both being reputedly the most resilient legion, but Vulkan had always forbidden the use of such horrors as phosphex, dirty bombs and chemical weaponry, domains in which the Death Guard had always excelled. Fully ignoring the depths to which the Death Guard had fallen, the Salamanders initially simply believed that they were facing a devastated cadre. Advancing further into the complex, Tech Marine Zon, who had stayed behind, voxed ahead that he had found the crews of both Death Guard gunships dead, killed by precise headshots of mass-reactive shells through the canopy of their Thunderhawks. Whoever opposed the Death Guard on Rampart was quite the marksman. Having still not encountered the enemy, the Salamanders reassessed their position, closing on the main generatoria of the facility where the survivors would without doubt be located. The Death Guard's methods of war had always been deliberately slow, mercilessly grinding their foe into utter destruction. Encountering the enemy at last, the Salamanders fell on Mortarian's rear guard, a single 7-man squad, which went down fighting. Initially held back by heavy weapon fire of a Volkite culverin, the Salamanders doused the entire corridor in cleansing flame. After Sergeant Zytos had clipped the enemy weapon carrier, Numeon led the charge, uttering his personal battle cry, "Vulkan lives!" And Numeon struck down 2 legionaries, with Dracos and Basilisk, and engaged a third before the rest of the Salamanders could reach the hand-to-hand combat. Easily dispatching a Death Guard legionary with a swing of his thunderhammer, Zytos saw the sole unengaged Death Guard legionary grab for a bomb at his waist. Warning Numeon of the impeding danger, he shoulder-charged the Death Guard he was struggling with into the path of his comrade, who absorbed a great deal of the blast, but left him alive. It was only then that Numeon realized that he was now surrounded by a cloud of toxic and acidic vapors, eating away at his armor's hermetic seals. Although less close to the blast, Zytos' armor registered similar damage, the deadly vapors having easily been able to kill the entire squad in the limited confines of these corridors. Zytos had no other choice than to give the order to burn the toxic miasma. Again, Vorko stepped forward, dousing the entire corridor in cleansing flame. Only this time, the blast was directed against their captain. The Salamanders' Legion claimed their name from the hugely powerful predators of their home world Nocturne that resided in the planet's fiery depths. Their hides are extremely resilient and almost impervious to flames, and it is customary for the Legion's officers and elite troops to hunt down and kill such a beast as a rite of passage, and to wear the beast's hide as a token of valor. As captain of the Pyre Guard, Artelus Numeon had also participated in these rites, however. His equipment had been irredeemably lost in Istvaan and Travails, meaning that he no longer had the fireproof protection of his noble Drake hide. As the horrified Salamanders looked upon their leader, now entirely surrounded by flames, few doubted that they now witnessed the funerary pyre of Artelus Numeon. The Salamanders thought that they had roasted their commander alive, but to their astonishment, Numeon's voice could still be heard on the squad's Vox channel, invoking Vulkan's name, followed by silence. As the fiery inferno abated, Numeon's bent form could be seen, clutching Vulkan's sigil in his hand. The servos of Numeon's armor had been seared shut, and the proud drake-green livery had been burnt away and replaced by soot. His helmet was a ruin, while in some places his armor's ceramite was bare and glistened with heat. But ultimately, Numeon had somehow survived. As the Salamanders were about to rejoice, a Death Guard legionary attacked from Numeon's flank, clenching their captain's throat with his hands and tried to suffocate him. Numeon grasped the gladius at his side that Sergeant Thiel had gifted him on Macragge, and rammed the weapon deep into the Death Guard's skull, thus ending the fight. Galvanized by this new miracle, the Salamanders pushed on. Having been forewarned by their comrades in the corridor, a small detachment of Death Guard had been ready to receive the onrushing Salamanders, confining them for the time being to the role of spectators. 3 Aegis defense lines had already been overrun by the 14 remaining legionaries of the 14th, which marched unimpeded through a deluge of lasfire and solid slugs, their power armor impervious to such weapons. Yet the Death Guard had not gone unbloodied. As attested, several dead legionaries brought down by precise bolt of fire. Their would-be ally could be seen firing from one of the gun towers, a grey legionary in plain armour of an unknown but undoubtedly advanced pattern. With Vorko impeded by his leg wound, having been crippled by the Death Guard's Volkite culverin in the corridor, the 4 remaining Salamanders split up into 2 teams and used the wreckage as cover to close in with the 14th Legion's rearguard. The 4 legionaries opposing them, already compromised and burned from Vorko's sustained fire, went down swiftly, stalling the Death Guard's advance, which now seemed to split their attention between the Salamanders and their quarry, the Angel, as they had taken to calling him, laid down suppressing fire to further disrupt the reorganizing Death Guard. Vorko switched to his sidearm to lay down suppressing fire as well, the enemy now beyond range of his flamethrower. The loss of his right eye had impeded Numeon more than he had readily anticipated, as the loss of depth perception severely compromised his ballistic skills. However, he had always excelled in close combat, and only needed his brothers to allow him to close with their enemy. Following Numeon, the Salamanders quickly went for hand-to-hand combat, where their superior weapons would make the difference, Zytos smashing the enemy with his Thunderhammer, and Numeon slashing with Draconius. The Grey Legionary also charged in, killing 2 Death Guard in quick succession, his fighting style brutal and not eloquent, a pugilist more than a fencer. With the Death Guard defeated, Numeon finally stepped up as the group's leader asked the Angel for his name. The situation was tense. Numeon still aimed Draconius at the Grey Legionary's heart. On closer inspection, Numeon realized the Legionary's armor was not totally bereft of iconography, as they had previously thought, but was adorned with the rune of Malcador the Sigillite. Raising his hands in surrender, the legionary presented himself as Brother Caspian Hecht, and that he was indeed one of Malcador's knights-errant. With matters sufficiently resolved to allow a plan of evacuation for Rampart survivors, the combat squad was joined by Zathan's group, which had been exploring another part of the station and had thus missed the battle. This reunion was however cut short by Tech Marine Zon's urgent communication, advising the landing party that a 3rd gunship of the Death Guard had appeared and were now trying to destroy the Draconius. Quickly redeploying, the Salamanders had little hope of seriously damaging the gunship, as they carried no heavy weapons, but a lucky shot from Zathan's bolter blew out the port-side turbine, which considerably destabilized the gunship. Almost on cue, the Draconius' rear ramp lowered, and Epistole Usherman stepped out, his armor illuminated by blue-green witchfire. Directing his fingertips at the looming gunship, he released a serpent of eldritch fire against the vehicle, gutting the gunship before its fuel reserves ignited, and the thing exploded mid-flight. The Death Guard had no time to evacuate the stricken craft, and those who had survived the explosion and the fall were quickly dispatched by the Salamanders. Usherman, exhausted by the use of his powers, fell to his knees, explaining to the onrushing Zytos that he had beheld a vision of their Primarch compelling him to rise and aid his brothers. "Vulkan lives," he told them. And none present doubted his words. Even Caspian Hecht was convinced. And now, I would like to take a slight detour and introduce Nomus Rhythan. Nomus Rhythan, also known as the Keeper of the Keys of Prometheus and the Voice of Fire. He was the Lord Chaplain of the 18th Legion, an important figure in the Salamanders throughout the days of the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy eras during the late 30th and 31st millennia. The Lord Chaplain had been entrusted by the Primarch Vulkan himself to stay behind on their homeworld to act as the regent of Nocturne and Prometheus. Left behind to supervise the training and initiation of the Legion's new generation of neophytes, Nomus Rhythan quite literally held the future of his Legion in his hands. When the Chaplain Edict promulgated by the Council of Nicaea came to the Salamanders Legion, it fell on fertile grounds. Unlike other legions of the Astartes, the 18th had to be united, having been deployed piecemeal over several different war zones during much of the early decades of the Great Crusade. The reunification with their Genesire and Primarch Vulkan heralded a new beginning for the Legion, where Terran-born and Nocturne-born legionnaires would come together and build unshakable bonds of brotherhood. In his wisdom, Vulkan had drawn from the stories and mythologies of his home planet the elements that would become known as the Promethean cult, a spiritual discipline to federate and unite the Legion in brotherhood and direct their path as Vulkan had foreseen it. To help to spread this doctrine, influenced by the teachings and culture of his adopted world of Nocturne, Vulkan created a body of chosen legionaries versed in the teachings of the Promethean cult, known as the Voices of Fire, or the Ignax. Nomus Rhythan was amongst the very first to be introduced into this caste. Little is known of Nomus Rhythan before he was accepted amongst the Ignax, except that he was one of the newly introduced Nocturne-born legionaries. As an Ignax, he was reputed to be a renowned orator and instructor, teaching both other Ignax and legionaries in the way of Vulkan. But what made him invaluable to the Salamanders was his friendship with their Primarch, to whom he often acted as confidant. So it was that when the Chaplain Edict was imposed, the Ignax naturally became the first generation of the Legion's chaplains. Rhythan, always popular amongst his peers, was unanimously voted by them to become the Salamander's first Lord Chaplain. As an outward sign of his new responsibilities, Vulkan presented the newly elected Lord Chaplain with a weapon he had forged himself for his friend, a mighty double-handed warhammer known as Darkstar Falling, which was rightly later regarded as one of the most treasured relics of the Legion. As news reached Nocturne of the War Master's betrayal and treachery on Isstvan III, Vulkan mobilized his Legion for a counterattack. But before departing for Istvaan V, the Primarch bade the Lord Chaplain to remain behind at Prometheus, with the Legion's neophytes and instructors as regent in his stead. With a heavy heart, Rhythan obeyed, for he would not have abandoned his friend and Primarch so easily, but in doing so, Vulkan had destined Rhythan to survive, the future of his Legion in his hands. It is likely that in the first few solar weeks of his new position as regent, Rhythan carried out his Primarch's orders to the letter, supervising the initiation and training of the Legion's neophytes in matters of war and those of the Promethean cult. Only when the dire news of the drop site massacre reached Nocturne did the matters change. With very little information available as to the true fate of the Legion and their Primarch, Nomus Rhythan found himself in command of a Legion that had been virtually annihilated. Despite having ships and men at his disposal, Rhythan did not sally forth to aid or search for his Legion's Primarch, but chose to remain on Nocturne. Neither the news of Vulkan's unknown fate, nor the rallying cry from Rogol Dawn on distant Terra reached the Lord Chaplain. But this did not mean that Rhythan sat idly. The Lord Chaplain assumed that it was only a matter of time before Nocturne would eventually come under attack during the galactic civil war that had now erupted. Rhythan began to fortify his homeworld by establishing a series of bastions on key strategic areas of Nocturne. The Legion's forge would work night and day to craft the necessary tools of war to equip the neophytes whose training regime was stepped up accordingly. Many solar months after the events of Isstvan V, a Salamander's battle barge emerged from the warp in close proximity to Nocturne, the Charybdis, which had transported Vulkan's body from distant Macragge back to his homeworld. When vessels of the Death Guard and Wordbearers appeared close behind, it was clear that Nocturne was under attack, and a single ship flew from the Charybdis to the surface with a holy treasure inside. The battle for the Draconius Gate. Despite the pilot's best efforts, the gunship was sent crashing down. The twin-linked Avenger bolt cannons mounted in the Fire Raptor's nose, making short work of the Thunderhawk's armor. 5 more Drakes were killed as shots shredded through the troop compartment before the gunship hit the ground in the Rhythan plain. In the distance, a familiar silhouette stood on the horizon, Mount Deathfire, their ultimate goal. Yet the mountain was way too far away for any hope to reach it on foot. 3 more Fireborn had not survived the crash, amongst them the pilot, and thus the pyre had been reduced to just 12 warriors. Luckily, Zytos and Gargo were counted amongst the survivors, Numeon as well, but their survival was only a question of minutes. Trying to make a run for it would only end with their pointless death, run down by the relentless gunfire of the descending Fire Raptors. Likewise, their lack of heavy weapons meant that they could not hope to damage the aircraft. All that remained was to seek cover in the ruins of their downed gunship and wait for their killers to set foot on Nocturne. Despite their dire situation and demoralization that they faced imminent death, the survivors of the Charybdis found some solace in that they would at least die on the soil of their beloved homeworld. Extracting Vulkan's casket from the Thunderhawk, the Salamanders gathered for their final last stand. One of the Fire Raptors overflew them, no doubt relaying their position to the Reaper's shrouds mobilizing troops before turning back to make a strafing run. Its Avenger bolt cannons were cycling up as the gunship was suddenly hit by a missile which sent the Fire Raptor to explode on a rocky wall. 3 gunships in the unmistakable green livery of the Salamanders Legion rushed overhead, dispersing the Death Guard flyers which prudently retreated. From the lead gunship, a communication channel was established, the speaker identifying himself as the famed Nomus Rhythan, Lord Chaplain of the 18th Legion and Keeper of the Keys of Prometheus. Quickly realizing the importance of this new arrival, Rhythan ordered his gunships to land to seek out Numeon, who had likewise announced his identity across the Vox. Stepping from the gunship's ramp with his personal guard of fire drakes, upon meeting him, Nomus Rhythan clasped Numeon's hand in the old ways of warriors and quickly asked about Vulkan's condition. "He's sleeping," answered Numeon, confessing his belief in Vulkan's possible resurrection. He told the Lord Chaplain of the hardships they had to endure to reach Nocturne. With the Reaper's shroud descending into low orbit, time was short at hand, and any lengthier explanation or tale of their adventure would have to wait. War had come to Nocturne, and no matter how severely depleted the rank of the Salamanders Legion were, they intended to fight to their dying breath. To Numeon's relief, the pyre soon found out that the venerable chaplain had not waited for reliable information to act upon in regard to his legion's status, but had heeded his own counsel and fortified Nocturne as much as he could. Several outposts, formidable in every aspect, had been erected to withstand just this kind of peril they were now facing, and the continued training of the legion's neophytes meant that the legion had almost 800 trained and armed warriors at hand. Legiones Astartes all, they could be quickly gathered to man these formidable defences. Quickly mobilizing the survivors of the pyre and Vulkan's casket, the Salamanders embarked on the gunships and rallied to the closest of these new outposts, the Draconius Gate. As Vulkan's chosen regent, the task to command the defences of the Draconius Gate fell to Nomus Rhythan, Numeon wisely choosing not to challenge the Lord Chaplain's authority. In accordance with Rhythan's intentions, the veterans of the pyre were disseminated along the line, so the neophytes may benefit from their experience. Gargo, The former artisan had joined the Tech Marine Covenant that would attend the outpost's void shield generators, which only left Zytos and Numeon to accompany Nomus Rhythan to his command bunker. The Lord Chaplain hoped that by mustering the strength of his legion at the Draconius gate, he would lure the Death Guard to attack them head-on, rather than ravage Nocturne's civilian settlements. It was a tactic Numeon was sure would work, because the enemy commander obviously still wanted to claim Vulkan's body. The fight would be a grim one, barely 800 Salamanders, most of them having never seen actual battle, yet fought traitor marines, a likely superior but most importantly battle-hardened force of the dreaded Death Guard. Yet the Salamanders would fight on their homeworld, in immediate vicinity of one of their most sacred grounds, and to protect their Primarch. Perhaps these elements would make a difference. Faithful to their brutal method of war, the Death Guard began the battle with a prolonged orbital bombardment from the still-functioning guns of the Reaper's Shroud. The bombardment was not a conventional one, but had been comprised solely of vile virus weaponry, flesh-eating bacteria, and other deadly nerve agents. While the shells themselves harmlessly exploded on the outpost's void shields, its deadly payload was not so easily dismissed. Most worlds would have died to such a bombardment, their armies reduced to slurry, their war machines to corroded and useless chunks of radioactive or contaminated junk. But Nocturne was not just any world. Nocturne was a death world, a world that ended life since its creation, where only the hardiest of survivors endured. As soon as they were released, the airborne poisons burned in contact with Nocturne's volcanic atmosphere. Yet such was the deluge of shells that this was not enough, and soon a yellow miasma began to creep ever closer to the Draconius gate's outermost bunkers. Rhythan quickly saw the danger for what it was, and ordered the burners engaged. The batteries of auto-flamers releasing an atmosphere that sanitized Nocturne's surface for good. After 20 minutes of continuous burn, the Death Guard realized that their stratagem had failed, and stopped the bombardment. Now the true battle could be joined. As the Death Guard began to land their troops, the outpost's anti-air and orbital weapons exacted a heavy toll, shooting down some of the Death Guard's Fire Raptors and Thunderhawks, while others crashed to the planet's surface, their turbines choked by the volcanic ashes carried upon Nocturne's hot winds. The Death Guard would, however, not be so easily denied. That much Numeon knew for certain. The Death Guard commander, the relentless Malig Leistigon, was determined to claim the honor of being the very first Astartes to truly slay a Primarch. As the Death Guard casualties mounted, and the battalions gathered on the plain, it quickly became apparent that the Salamanders were greatly outnumbered and outgunned. The 18th Legion supported only 3 gunships which hadn't even taken to the air, and there was no heavy armor support on the ground. Meanwhile, the Death Guard had deployed several armored battalions they were justly famed for, great formations of Land Raiders and Sicaran battle tanks, capable of overwhelming the void shields through their sheer firepower alone. Yet the Salamanders stayed oddly inactive. Zytos did suggest trying to discreetly exfiltrate Vulkan's casket to Prometheus, but Numeon didn't consider it seriously for more than an instant. They had reached Nocturne, and this story would end on Nocturne. So much he told Zytos, before fixing the assembling Death Guard, waiting intently for Nocturne to show its true strength. The landing zones chosen by the Death Guard accounted for the first casualties, as gunships and drop pods landed in magma trenches or vanished in open chasms. Some of the less fortunate were cooked alive within their own battle plate or their transports, as these were caught in searing geysers of superheated steam which erupted from Nocturne's soil. Any warlord trying to assault a death world was a fool, even if that warlord was one of the Legiones Astartes. But the Death Guard had always vaunted themselves on their tenacity and resilience, and were confident in their eventual victory. It would just be harder fought than they had initially anticipated, or so they thought. In contrast, the Salamanders knew fully well what dangers lurked beneath the ground, and eagerly anticipated the moment the Death Guard would realize it, too. As the Death Guard's armored battalions assembled, the seismic disturbance created by so many tanks awakened the aggressive fauna of Nocturne. Soon, gnarlworms, undrakes, basilisks, wyverns, dracons, and targons spilled forth from their earthly domains and ran rampant across the Death Guard formations. The more massive gnarlworms charged the Sicarans and Land Raiders, their horns more than able to rip asunder the tank's armor, while the fire-breathing Urdrakes burned legionaries and tank armor to molten slag. By now, the 14th Legion's assault had been badly mauled, just as Nomus Rhythan had predicted. Seeing the Death Guard's beleaguered forces in disarray thanks to the monsters in their midst, Rhythan, as overall commander of the Salamanders, ordered the void shields lowered and the Salamanders to charge. As last survivor of the famed Pyre Guard, Artelus Numeon was invited to join the Lord Chaplain amongst the Fire Drakes, the very best of the 18th Legion. Leading the counterattack from the fore, Nomus Rhythan and Artelus Numeon picked up speed and charged the Death Guard's front ranks. As both formations were about to meet, sensing a turn in the tide of battles, the Drakes of Nocturne let go of their prey, leaving a virtually disorientated and helpless Death Guard preciously little time to reorganize their ranks and receive their charge. From the Draconius gate, Thud guns shelled the Death Guard's rear lines to further disorganize the enemy while the charge hit home. The Death Guard's front ranks were quickly overwhelmed, but the Death Guard would not be undone so easily, even when a talon of countercharging Death Guard Contemptor dreadnoughts were brought down by disciplined fire from both lance cannons and Volkite culverines. Mortarian sons died fighting, weapons in hand. Overhead, the artillery duel between the two opposing forces continued unabated, until a large magma chasm opened up and swallowed a large part of the Death Guard's artillery train. With the battle quickly turned in favor of the Salamanders, the only true threat remaining were the enemy commander, Maelig Laestaigon, and his Terminator elite. Still convinced he could snatch victory from the hands of defeat, Laestaigon announced himself in pompous fashion, but his angry diatribe was swiftly cut short in single combat by Numeon. With their commander's death, the heart of the Death Guard's assault had been cut out, and those that remained only faced utter annihilation. Soon, Nocturne would swallow and destroy every sign of the Death Guard passage, and the very name of the warlord who had believed he could conquer the Salamander's homeworld would be lost to time. Ultimate fate. With the Death Guard vanquished and Vulkan's corpse safely returned to Nocturne, Artelus Numeon had no reason to believe that Vulkan would not be reborn. With Nomus Rhythan's help, the Lord of Drakes would finally be resurrected. Of that, Numeon was sure. However, Numeon could not have anticipated that the respected Lord Chaplain would oppose him. It was not that Rhythan refused to conduct the sacred burial rites of the 18th Legion. Rather, he did not believe that Vulkan would rise again at the rite's end. As his pupil, Valkyr before him, Rhythan lacked the belief that Vulkan's state was anything other than the eternal slumber of death. He had of course heard of the miracles witnessed by those few of the pyre that remained, but he did not believe them. The Circle of Fire's lessons of immolation and rebirth were only spiritual, but by laying Vulkan to rest in the heart of Mount Deathfire, another leader could emerge. Artelus Numeon, if he so chose, if he wished it so. For the sake of their legion's future, Rhythan would not challenge Numeon's claim of leadership over the 18th Legion, confident in Numeon's abilities to federate and reforge the Salamanders. Hope still remained that those garrisons stationed on Geryon and other places could be raised and called back to Nocturne. Numeon, however, declined the Lord Chaplain's offer. In his eyes, only Vulkan was fit to lead the Salamanders back into war. Vulkan would live again. The invaders had brought Vulkan's body to the sacred ground beneath Mount Deathfire. Despite his misgivings, Nomus Rhythan agreed to conduct the proper burial rituals for his Primarch, for he was wise enough to see that the Legion, or all that remained of it, was in dire need of a sense of closure. So it came to pass that the last sons of Vulkan, by now fewer than 800 in number, witnessed his passing. Each and every one of them had received the Brander's mark that would commemorate the death of their Primarch. Armoured but unhelmed, their drake hide capes fluttering occasionally in the heat, the Salamanders bore witness to the bier carrying Vulkan to his final resting place. Vulkan was borne to the heat of Mount Deathfire, on a bier of granite with Deathbringer, his mighty warhammer still clenched in his grip, and the fulgurite spear that had claimed his immortal life still jutting from his chest, for none had been able to remove it. Ceremonial chains had been wrapped around the Primarch's arms and legs, torso and neck, to bind his spirit to his body, allowing both to be consecrated to the flame. The bier advanced to the monotonous beat of hammers on anvils, and the gathered salamanders struck their breasts in unison. Before the bier, his head bowed in supplication, marched Lord Chaplain Nomus Rhythan. Reaching the mountain's caldera, Rhythan raised his fist, and silence fell over the chamber before the Lord Chaplain started to recite the traditional verses in the old tongue of Nocturne. A cadre of 4 fire drakes gathered around their Primarch, holding him aloft while the chains that would let him descend into the heart of the furnace were pulled taut enough to hold him. With the final words of Rhythan's speech still ringing in their ears, Vulkan's body was lowered into the caldera. As the Primarch's body disappeared into the magma, the Salamanders daubed their fingers into burning ash and traced the Nocturnian sigil for rebirth on their bare foreheads. Then the fire drakes let go of the chains, and Nomus Rhythan destroyed the bier which had borne Vulkan this far with a strike of his mighty warhammer. And thus it was done. Vulkan, the Primarch of the 18th, had been consigned to the fires of his homeworld. Minutes turned into hours, hours into days, and still there was no sign of Vulkan rising. After over a week of waiting, this turn of events sufficiently broke Numeon's spirit. As the next time of trials drew near, Numeon renounced his rank and position. Long had he been meditating over the words of Magnus the Red. How much would you sacrifice to see Vulkan restored? He now had his answer. Stripping off his power armor and weapons, which both he reverently put away in Vulkan's gold casket, Artelus Numeon stealthily and secretly departed from his fellow legionaries. Wandering away into the burning ash wastes around Mount Deathfire, he offered himself as a final sacrifice so that his father and Primarch could be restored. Descending into one of the volcano's magma vents, Artelus Numeon departed the world of the living, never to be reunited with his gene-sire again. Nomus Rhythan's ultimate fate remains unclear, though he still played an important role within the Legion. Upon seeing that his faith in the Primarch's resurrection had not been answered, Artelus Numeon again withdrew into isolation in order to grieve, leaving Nomus Rhythan to organize the Legion and their homeworld for the oncoming time of trials. Vulkan had not risen again, and with Numeon indisposed, this left only Rhythan fit to lead. The neophytes had reacted well to their training and had been blooded in battle, and so 7 detachments had been formed from their numbers, and it was the hope of all to be able to join the Emperor on Terra and fight for the survival of the Imperium. Speculation ran high whether it would be Artelus Numeon or Nomus Rhythan that would claim the title of Legion Master and lead them on this mission. This speculation ran rife right up to the day Artelus Numeon was discovered missing. His armor, weapons, and even Vulkan's sigil were later discovered entombed in the golden cask that had housed the Primarch's body. Soon afterwards, a lone figure, unmistakably a salamander, was found. Weak, but alive, wandering in the ash wastes around Mount Deathfire. Soon, news reached every corner of Nocturne. from the sanctuary cities to the Legion's outposts to the fortress monastery on Prometheus, that their hope against hope had been rewarded. Vulkan lived once more. But of Rhythan and his role in the Primarch's resurrection, there was no sign. The final fall of Magnus. The wrath of the Son of Nocturne. Journey to Terra. Upon his resurrection, Vulkan was in a condition similar to a fugue state, and remembered little. He found himself in the depths of Mount Deathfire, conversing with an old man calling himself Deathfire personified. The man urged Vulkan to travel to Terra, and led the Primarch to 2 items that he had no memory of forging: the Thunderhammer, Udrakul, and the Talisman of 7 Hammers. When Vulkan awoke, he was at the steps of Mount Deathfire, and discovered by 3 of his legionaries, Atok Epidemi, Barak Zythos, and Igon Gargo. Vulkan ordered the 3 to return in 3 days, and forbade them to speak to anyone else that the Primarch had returned to Nocturne. When the 3 returned, now dubbed Vulkan's Draxward, the Primarch used his talisman to open a webway portal deep below Nocturne. What followed next was an arduous journey through multiple webway tunnels and exits to reach Terra. Vulkan and his Draxward found themselves in a satellite kingdom of Komorah, battling Dark Eldar. They next found themselves with the fleet of Shadrach Medusan, still engaged in a guerrilla war against Horus. Vulkan found Medusan's fleet in the midst of upheaval, with the cult of the Gorgon claiming that it had resurrected Ferrus Manus. Upon meeting the supposed reborn Ferrus, Vulkan discovered it to be little more than a mechanical puppet, with one of Ferrus Manus's mechanical arms attached. Saddened that his brother would be shamed so, Vulkan shattered the puppet with his hammer. Vulkan refused to take part in Medusan's war, and during the Battle of the Arachne Chain, left to Caldera. On Caldera, Vulkan was greeted by Eldar, who guided him to a new webway portal on the orders of Eldrad Ulthran himself. Inside the webway once more, Vulkan and the Draxward ventured upon Calastar, long since abandoned since the war within the webway. In Calastar, the companions were beset by demons, and Vulkan became engaged in a battle with the great unclean one, Aghalbor. Using the Talisman of 7 Hammers, Vulkan was able to not only slay the demon, but to give it a true death. Rare. Still beset by demonic hordes, the companions were saved by Eldred, revealing himself as the Old Man of Mount Deathfire. Revealing that the way into the Imperium dungeon had been sealed by the Emperor, Eldred opened up a new portal that took Vulkan and his warriors to the front of the Imperial Palace. Vulkan was then reunited with a visibly relieved Rogul Dawn, giving him a hug, would you believe, but promptly led by custodies to the Golden Throne to meet with the Emperor himself. The Emperor, now trapped permanently on the Golden Throne, revealed that he had not only expected Vulkan, but had been guiding him this entire journey, and had been the force that compelled him to construct Udrakul and the Talisman of 7 Hammers. The Emperor told Vulkan that the Primarch's purpose had always been intended for this moment, for he was designed to construct the talisman and oversee its true purpose. The Emperor revealed that the talisman was a weapon of unprecedented power, a dead man's switch that would consume all of Terra should Horus succeed in the coming struggle. It would be Vulkan's duty to press the switch that would destroy Terra, but deny the world to the powers of chaos. Vulkan was aghast by the prospect, but the Emperor told him that he must be the one to oversee the device, for the Primarch had always been the most hesitant to use the weapons he forged. With that, Vulkan installed the talisman into the Golden Throne and took up position by the Eternity Gate. Keeping his existence a secret, save for a select few during the Siege of Terra, Vulkan next door action when Magnus the Red and a group of his hand-picked 1,000 sons infiltrated the Imperial dungeon to kill the Emperor. Vulkan arrived, and his brother, Magnus, stood before the Emperor's golden throne. The Emperor did not even open his eyes to look upon the son he had positioned to be here, forced to be here. Vulkan looked on as the Emperor and his red son, Magnus, in some ways so much like him, like his father, both spoke. He only ever wanted to know more, his mind and soul insatiable. But what happened next went so badly, because Magnus truly was like his father, perhaps even better than he. For the Emperor forgave his son, had offered him a second chance, a chance to come home, to stand by the Emperor's side again with his brothers, Rogel, Reboot, Lion, Sanguinius Corvus, and beloved Yagatai, his one true friend. But Vulkan came down to protect his father, as it seemed Magnus would strike the prone body of the master of mankind. For the Emperor, that ancient everyman Neoth, was embattled. He was losing. His mind and soul were amongst the Custodes Mechanicus in the webway, holding back all the legions of hell. So even now, at the last, he could not stand and offer his embrace to his son, to bring him into his arms as he should. For Magnus wanted to be redeemed. He wanted it so badly. For he had only ever thought of himself as acting for the betterment of all of humanity. But he had failed. Because he was not informed of the stakes and the players in the game, is what he told himself. But really, his father had told him his rules. He had spoken, he had judged, and he had forbidden. And yet still, Magnus disobeyed him. This Magnus could never truly see. Perhaps, just perhaps, if his father had the chance to fully be there, to engage with his son, then he could have made the offer less stark, less dark. For the Emperor offered Magnus the chance at redemption, the chance to lead a new legion, the most powerful legion of all, the one he had truly deserved all along. But Magnus asked of his existing children, his 1,000 sons. And the Emperor again passed judgment, or so it seemed. For he stated that the 1,000 sons had fallen too far, too completely. They were mutated too much. They were now nothing more than warped beings that could not be saved, could not be redeemed. And this hurt Magnus. For deep down, he knew. It was his fault all along. He had been the one to stay the flesh change in that first pact. He must now have known with whom it was made. He knew really. He had blundered. Meaning to be kind, he had become a tool of darkness, a slave to chaos. But one last vestige of him his humanity resisted, held him back from being a full devotee of the Dark Gods. But it was this vestige of humanity, or nobility, that damned him in the end. For Magnus was ever a better father than the Emperor, he said to himself, as he refused to leave his sons to damnation. He moved to attack, shattered at his own loss. For Magnus had lost everything. The promise of the future, the bright shining soul that was his, the best legion of Marines that he could mentor and forge into the most lethal force mankind had ever known. His father offered him paradise, respect from his brothers, a place at the heart of the Imperium, a land to forge with the power of his mind and vision alone in the webway. He would be near worshipped as he tended humanity on its pathway, its evolution. Inside the webway, safe from chaos. Yet Magnus, inquisitive Magnus, was left with one last vestige of humanity. And when he looked down the stairs at his sons, into their faces, Ahriman and the others all stared, just stared, like children. His children. The ones he had led astray, the ones he had betrayed, all because he could not do as he was told. He could not leave Pandora's box unopened. It was all Magnus's fault. And he knew then, he knew he could not leave them. For they were destined for hell, as his father had stated. So did he see the reality of it with his ghost sight. His third eye saw the travesties that were now their souls, their dark destinies. And Magnus could not do it. He could not let them go to hell on their own. But even then, perhaps he thought he could one day trick the trickster and regain them from Tzeentch. Perhaps he just did what was expected, to show his sons his decision, to show them that he knew that they were all damned, that none would ever love them again, that they were now beings of evil. Yet he would go with them. He would cross the Rubicon for them, the most difficult Rubicon ever. And he moved to attack the Emperor of Mankind. Magnus was then engaged by the only Primarch that approached his size, his brother Vulkan. The Forge Master raised his hammers to Magnus, leaping to the defense of the Emperor. The battle went one way, then the other. The two colossi moved with such speed that none could make them out. Yet in the end, Vulkan was saved by another. One of Vulkan's best, his Eigen Gargo, so reminiscent of that which was to follow for the Master of Mankind himself on the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit. For Gargo took the hit that would have slain Vulkan. He gave his life for his lord. Vulkan then pounced upon Magnus, finally enraged. He swung his mighty hammer so vigorously, so adeptly, so forcefully, that Magnus was smashed down under its rain of thunderous blows. Finally, when Vulkan was about to administer the killing strike on Magnus and crush his skull, the inevitable happened. To save his own life and the lives of his legion, Magnus finally gave in to Tzeentch. And in the nanosecond of his final capitulation, the utter surrender of his soul, he and his men were forced from the Materium by the wards around Terra, as he became a demon Primarch, a demon prince of Tzeentch. Vulkan had defended the Emperor at his moment of greatest weakness, of greatest need. In his moment of utter defenselessness against perhaps his mightiest son. No matter what happened later, this is one of the moments that changed the universe. When Vulkan greeted one of his favorite brothers with love, then had to defend his father from that same brother. The man who he forced to kneel to a dark god. And perhaps this is one of the many reasons that Vulkan, a perpetual, no longer openly walks amongst men. For the pain of this moment must be scorching, even to the Lord of Forges, the Fireborn, the great Salamander. A terrible burden to bear for so long. For even in the grim darkness of the far future, Vulkan lives. I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. I hope you've enjoyed this video about some of the thrilling elements of the most recent Horus Heresy Legions expansion. And I wish to thank the crew at Horus Heresy Legions for sponsoring this video. So, do hit the description or pinned comment and get stuck in. See if you can walk the path of the Salamanders, from the horror of the drop site all of the way to Nocturne and then beyond. Vulkan and his two mighty sons, Nomus Rhythan and Artelus Numeon, await you there. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.